So, ladies and gentlemen, it would appear that we are in much bigger trouble than what we previously thought when it comes to America's tariffs. Now, all of you at this point knows that South Africa is facing a guaranteed 30% increase in tariffs on the 1st of August, along with a possible 10% increase in tariffs for all BRICS nations, which would put us at about 40%. That is known. Although it must be mentioned that the BRICS tariff has not been officialized yet, so we don't know when or if that is even coming. This then also comes at the new revelation that there will be a further tariff included for all countries that do business with Russia. We are one of those countries. We trade with Russia pretty consistently. So there is a good chance, depending on what Trump makes that tariff, that we might be staring a 50 to a 60% tariff in the face. That's literally what could be happening, which would be absolutely devastating, but it gets so much worse than that. Hey guys, very quickly, if you enjoy these videos, if you think that I bring rational, honest conversation to the table, please consider hitting the like button as well as leaving a comment. YouTube's new algorithm really wants it, otherwise videos die pretty much on delivery. Anyways, thank you so much for the support. Enjoy the video. Bye. Now, all of this information comes from a BizNews interview that was done with ex-World Trade Organization executive Johan, right? And he went into a lot of detail about what South Africa can actually expect from these tariffs. And also, very specifically, what is it exactly that the Trump administration has a problem with? Now, according to our government, and basically what our government has been operating under, it's tariffs, right? South Africa has a number of import tariffs on specific American goods, and Trump wants those tariffs gone. According to Johan over here, as well as a number of other economists, it is not the exact trade barriers that Trump has an issue with, or at least that's not their biggest issue. Their biggest issue is things called, or at least known as, non-trade barriers. In other words, these are not barriers that is directly linked to trade, but they still introduce massive barriers to trade. For example, BEE, as well as affirmative action, things like VAT. And in this instance, Trump and the Americans have very big problems with different countries for different reasons. So with South Africa, they have a problem with our BEE, as well as the number of subsidies and subsidized industries that we have in this country to protect things. So, for example, in South Africa, we pay 30% more on all vehicles coming into the country, and all of this is meant to protect the vehicle industry of South Africa. So our cars are a hell of a lot more expensive, but this is considered a barrier as far as the Americans is concerned. And then BEE and things like that would be another barrier on top of that. With the EU, for example, one of the non-trade barriers that the Americans identify, things like VAT, which Trump wants gone there as well. Now, the big thing here, and what Johan also mentioned, there is a 0% chance that those tariffs do not come into effect. It will not happen. There's not enough time. These trade talks can take months. The problem South Africa has is we still don't have an ambassador in America. We don't have any special envoy or anyone actually speaking to the Americans. And from the side of the Americans, they view this as South Africa not taking America seriously. And so when South Africa finally wakes up and says, okay, we do want to talk to you, there's a good chance that the Americans will be like, wait your turn. And you might be so far back in line that it might take a year or two in order to actually get to America so that you can start organizing and talking about what kind of deals can actually be made here. We have discussed on this channel, I've shown you the evidences, I've shown you the realities of it, the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs that will be lost. In fact, when you talk to most or listen to most economists, they don't even know how to calculate the amount of jobs that will be lost in the long term. There's just no way of knowing that because the economy is so interlinked. So many different sectors require other sectors in order to operate that one sector goes down, it might take with it 100 other sectors, and you can't know until it actually happens. But here's where the scary bit is. Remember I told you it gets worse. Here's how it gets worse. Last night, Canada became the first moving country. What I mean by that is Trump went hard after Canada as well as after China. Canada, in response to what America is doing, have just announced sweeping tariffs on every nation on earth for steel and steel products.
What Canada did yesterday, they introduced a few measures, and particularly to protect their steel industry. They introduced a system of a tariff rate quota.
Tariffs going as high as 50%. Now, there are some countries that will be allowed to import or export to Canada up to the exact same level than what they exported in 2024, but anything over that will just instantly be subject to 50% tariffs. And for other countries that don't have free trade agreements with Canada, South Africa is one of these nations that don't have a free trade agreement with Canada. This means that we will now, from this moment forward, be paying a 50% tariff on all steel as well as steel products. The Americans have just introduced another sweeping amount of tariffs that will go on goods that you're trying to get to America without actually coming from your country, which means there are no avenues to get into the United States unless you make a deal. Now, here's where it gets scary, because you could argue, well, it's just Canada. What really is the point? Well, now it's America and Canada that you're dealing with tariffs. And this is the first round of tariffs announced by Canada. There might be more. But the European Union is looking at a similar tactic. And now that Canada and America has this tactic, there's a very real chance that the European Union will implement their own tariff barriers as well as their own tariffs on all products coming out of the rest of the world, because now we are in a proper tariff war. These trade wars are brutal. They oftentimes can lead to the destruction of the countries involved in them, but more often than not, it is the smaller countries, the developing nations, that pay the most expensive price on these tariffs, specifically countries like ours that continuously thinks that we don't need the Americans. We can just play by our own rules. This comes hot off the heels of China being heavily focused by Canada. There's rumors that the European Union will focus on China as well, and then the Americans focusing even harder on China. This is what the Americans are up to now, and our country appears to be in this sort of space where they just don't care. We'll do what we want. We don't really take the Americans seriously, and I believe we are going to pay the price for this. It's going to be a dear price. Because if you can't sell to America without imposing tariffs or without paying tariffs, you can't sell to Canada without tariffs, you can't sell to Europe without tariffs, who are you selling to? China? China doesn't buy that much. In fact, China buys pretty much the only things they need because they only really care about the raw minerals. The rest they'll produce at home. Are you going to sell to the Middle East? Again, not nations with a lot of money and massive economies to support all of the stuff that we already produce. If you take into account that 90% of all the income the corporate tax in South Africa is paid by 1,000 corporations, most of these corporations, by the way, probably rely on countries like the areas like the European Union, countries like Canada and America. When those exports dry up, how many of those 1,000 companies go bankrupt or leave the country, taking their business with them? And what is the South African economy then left with? Ladies and gentlemen, as always, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel about all of this, because it does help out a ton. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button, because YouTube really wants engagement. Otherwise, it kills these videos outright. To all of the patrons, I want to give a massive shout out. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And if you want more honest and rational conversation, consider becoming a patron. The links are in the description down below. Excuse me. Anyways, have a good day. As always, see you in the next one. Peace.